Hello everyone, and welcome to another reading vlog. So as you can probably tell from the thumbnail, there's going to be a little bit of a theme with this vlog, and that is I'm going to be trying to get through some mystery books. So I have at least 3 mystery books I'm going to try to get through in the month of October, and possibly a 4th one, but we'll see. It depends on how long it takes me to get through these 3. But one of them I have already started, and that is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. I actually started this one in one of my September vlogs and did not get very far. I believe I made it through chapter 10 at the end of the second vlog, and I'm now on chapter 18. So I've made a little bit more progress. And honestly, I could see myself just plowing through the rest of this book in the next day or two. It's trying to think of how to describe it. For me anyway, it's not that it's so riveting I can't put it down. It's just a very bingeable book. We have a very eclectic cast of characters. Vera Wong is quite humorous. She's kind of the traditional elder Chinese woman. You know, she expects respect because she's older and therefore wiser. She feels like she has all of this wisdom and experience that comes with age, and so she should be able to solve this murder, the death of this person that happened in her tea shop. Whether the police... in the world? It got windy outside. Whether the person who died in her tea shop is considered to have been murdered according to the police or not, she is sure that it's a murder, and she is determined she's going to figure it out. And she's just the type of person that when she walks in the room, she just commands obedience. She tells you to do something, you do it. She walks into your home, you just think, did I just invite her in? Or did she invite herself? But you don't argue. So it's a real fun book to read. It's a very bingeable book to read. And yeah, I could see myself sitting down and reading this straight through in the next day or two. So that's the first one that I'm working on. And then 2 others that I know for sure I'm going to be working on in this vlog are The Author's Guide to Murder, and I don't remember the author's name off the top of my head because it's a brand new book. I got approved for this one on NetGalley, and it comes out in November, so I want to get to it before the end of October. But then I'm also planning to read The Mysterious Mr. Quin by Agatha Christie for the Agatha Christie book club that Chantel is hosting on her Patreon this year. And this one is a short story collection. I've only read one short story involving Harlequin, and yes, that's his name. And I felt okay about it, but I also felt like you're kind of supposed to have an idea of who he is prior to reading the story that I read. So I'm curious to read some other stories about him and then see what I think of him. But those are the other 2 that I know for sure I'm going to try to get to in this vlog. There is a 4th one I might try to get to, and it's also a NetGalley book, but it's not coming out until January, so we will see. Again, it mostly depends on how much time I have, because I have a lot of books I'm trying to get to in the month of October. So if I can get through these other 2 books fast enough, I will try to work that one in. If I end up taking more time with these books, then I probably won't get to it. So we'll just have to see. But those are the books I'm going to be focusing on in this vlog. So I will talk with you when I have more of an update. Alright, so it's been a few days since I updated you, and I made the comment in the first update that I thought I could probably finish Vera Wong in another day or two, and apparently I was right because I finished it that night. So, that was almost 200 pages of reading in one day. Clearly, I enjoyed the book. So, I'm going to talk non-spoilers first, then I'll talk some spoilers. And if you don't want to be spoiled for the book, I will have timestamps down below so you can skip ahead, or I will have an image somewhere up here on the screen. So if it's easier, like if you're in your car, to just mute the video until the spoiler section is done, you can do that instead. So I'm pretty sure I talked a bit about what this book is actually about. But in case I didn't, this is about a 60-year-old Chinese woman named Vera Wong who owns a tea shop in San Francisco. And she wakes up one morning, comes downstairs to her tea shop, and there's a dead body on the floor. She has no idea who this man is. She has never seen him before. And when the police show up, she wants to help, but they don't seem very interested in what information she has to offer or what she wants to talk about. And they're not doing the things that she expects them to do based on what she knows of solving crimes from shows like CSI. And so because they're not handling this the way she thinks they should, she goes in with the mindset of, the police are incompetent, I must solve this crime on my own. And so begins her process of trying to figure out who the suspects are and which of them actually committed the crime. I will say, I had heard so many good things about this book that I think I may have gone in with my expectations being a little bit too high, because I started reading the book and I will admit I was not enthralled immediately. The writing style didn't pull me in right away, and I was also a bit concerned with how this book was going to cover the case because, again, Vera is going in with the mindset of, the police are incompetent, I have to solve this. And what I saw early on was that her expectations just weren't being met. It didn't mean the police were incompetent. It just meant that this wasn't playing out like a CSI episode for her. And of course, whatever we see on TV is meant to add drama, is meant to draw in the viewer and really make a good, compelling story. So you're going to see a lot more going into some of these crimes than you would in real life. So I wasn't really on board with Vera right away. I liked Vera as a character, but I wasn't on board with this whole the police are incompetent idea, because I'm like, I'm not seeing anything that says the police are incompetent. They did their perusal of her shop, they looked over the body, they had the medical examiner come in, and then the body was taken away, and that's all she sees. And obviously, they could have been doing a lot more work once they took the body away that she's not aware of, and they have no reason to make her aware of it. So I was expecting a mystery more like what I would see in like the Myrtle Hardcastle mysteries or something like that, where the main character sees what the police are doing and says, either sees the police are just incompetent, they just want to find somebody and they don't really care who it is to commit this, or just to say it was an accident just so they can write it off and it's done and dealt with. Or they see, okay, the police are somewhat competent, but I think there's things that they're missing and I want to find out what those are, like we more saw in the Aggie Morton series. And so I was expecting one of those two things, and that's not what I saw. So I wasn't 100% on board with this book to begin with. But I will say, throughout the entire book, I don't feel like we as the reader see the police as incompetent. This is mostly the story of, to be honest, I feel like it's more the story of an older woman who feels like she doesn't have much of a purpose in life and she's trying to find one, and this is what she has latched onto. And so in her head, it must be the police are incompetent, because if they're incompetent, then she has a purpose, she has a job to do. And so as I got further into the book and I'm meeting more of the characters, I'm getting more a sense of the story, I got a lot more pulled into it. And I loved watching her trying to solve this mystery. she's rounding up the suspects, she's getting to know them. She almost wants to go at this at like a Hercule Poirot style, where she meets each of the suspects, she gets to know them, and then at the end she wants to bring them all together and one by one tick off why this person couldn't do it, this person couldn't do it, and then at the end be able to say, aha, it could only be this person. But things don't go quite the way that she expects them to, in different ways. But I loved the throwback to those more classic style mysteries of having the cast of characters show up one by one, slowly getting to know them, and then slowly finding out who had motive, who had means, and who ultimately actually did it. And I loved all of the different characters that we got to meet in this book as well. So once the story really started to get going, I got very invested. Unfortunately, it just didn't grip me right away. But it's also a case of, like Vera, I feel like I had unmet expectations. And so I think looking at it from the perspective of this is a woman trying to find purpose in her life and this is how she's justifying that purpose, versus we're actually dealing with, some police who've taken on this case who are actually incompetent and she's picking up the slack. I think it gives you a very different viewpoint going into the book. So I think that's pretty much all I have spoiler free. It was a very good book. It's very easy to read, very quick and easy to get through. So once the momentum got going, it was easy to just keep going with it. So at this point, I'm going to start talking spoilers on the book. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this, again, there are timestamps down below so you can skip ahead, or if it's easier for you, there is an image up here and you can mute the video until the image goes away. So to cover the main thing that you're probably curious about in spoilers, I did actually figure this one out. It took quite a ways into the book, but I did ultimately figure it out. And the reason I figured out who it was is because something finally clicked with the fact that at the beginning of the book, soon after the body was found and then taken away, Vera stayed in her tea shop because she knows the criminal always returns to the scene of the crime. So she waited to see who would show up at her tea shop, and the 4 people who show up are the ones who are immediately on her suspect list. And like I said, something just clicked at some point while reading this book where I went, wait a second. There was someone else who showed up at her tea shop that she didn't consider a suspect, and that was Alex. And she wouldn't have suspected it because Alex is a regular customer. He shows up every single day. So she wouldn't have thought of him. But all of a sudden I went, but was it him? Because if that's what we're going with, this idea that the criminal returns to the scene of the crime, that's a 5th suspect and someone that she hasn't even considered. And I was already past the point where we knew Ricky and Sana's stories. And Sana had also told her story to Julia, and Julia had made the comment of, so I didn't kill him, you didn't kill him, so who did? So Julia is sure of her innocence, and we're fairly certain of her innocence as the reader because we know her thoughts when she's talking about that her husband said he was going to leave her and she packed up a bunch of his stuff because he left. And then she finds out that he died. And she's very surprised by it. And she's worried that she potentially comes across as guilty even though she's not. So having her inner thoughts, we know Julia didn't do it. Or we're at least fairly certain she didn't do it. And she makes the comment to Sana that she didn't. So I felt pretty safe at that point writing Ricky, Sana, and Julia off the list. So we know 3 of the 4 didn't do it. The only one left is Oliver. And Oliver's story feels very similar to Ricky and Sana's, where he did something, he's nervous about the police finding out about what he did, but I was pretty certain it was going to turn out he wasn't the killer either, which means we had to have a 5th suspect that we just don't know about. And the only thing that made sense was the other customer who showed up at the shop, who returned to the scene of the crime. So I had it in my mind that it might be Alex. It wasn't until I was getting quite a bit later in the book, though, that I put it together that Alex might actually be Oliver and Marshall's dad. And the way I ended up piecing it together is, as I got further into the book, I became more certain of my answer. And I ended up thinking, was there something that he said towards the beginning of the book? Because there's a couple times that we see him with Vera and they have a conversation. And I wondered, was there anything he said that would provide any kind of clue that he might have done this? And as I flipped back, all of a sudden I saw him talking about his two sons. His one son who's doing really well. And he made the comment of, I don't remember the actual comment now. Hold on. Because, of course, this part I didn't tab because I didn't think it was important at the beginning of the book. Alex makes the comment to Vera that his son has been in good spirits these days. He says that things are going swimmingly with his business. And it's that same, I'm pretty sure it's that same night that Marshall tells Vera he's made it big and he's leaving her. And so I was like, that would fit with Marshall, actually. And then he talks about his other son, who is more of a disappointment. He also makes the comment that his older son leaves him groceries outside his door every week. And I stopped and I went, actually, it's Oliver that does that. But Oliver's made the comment that, like, he just leaves the groceries. He doesn't see his dad. He just leaves the groceries. And I thought, he could be mistaken about which son is leaving him groceries. So I started to wonder, is he actually their dad? I will say the one thing I didn't expect was that this would be an intentional murder. Because when Vera was talking about the bird's nest in the tea that she gave Alex, I was assuming that this was a horrible accident and Alex felt terrible for it. Realized that he was the one who killed his son and he felt horrible about it. I was just assuming that maybe Marshall came to his house and he thought, let's sit down and have some tea together, and either didn't know or didn't remember that there was bird's nest in the tea, or maybe thought he grabbed one tea, accidentally grabbed a different one, something like that, and accidentally made a tea that killed Marshall. I was assuming that this was going to be a horrible accident. So I was very surprised to find out, no, this was intentional. That part surprised me a lot. So I did figure out most of it. Some of it was fairly late in the book, but I did figure out most of it. And sometimes in mysteries, I don't like it if I ultimately figure out the answer, because I'm like, does that mean it was too obvious? And at other times, if I think I have the right answer and I'm wrong, the right answer better be satisfying, because sometimes I have like the motive and everything built up in my head. And if I'm wrong, then it's like, okay, I'm sorry, but I feel like my answer was better. I had that with at least one Agatha Christie novel where I had the motive and everything figured out. It all made sense with the characters, and then I was wrong. This one, because of how late I figured it out, and because it kind of required thinking through a lot of the things we'd already seen and heard throughout this book to piece it all together, it felt like a very satisfying ending. I was not disappointed that I was able to figure it out. If I had figured it out like 2 or 3 chapters in, that would be a different story. And I have had books like that also, where I have figured them out very early on. And I've spent the entire book trying to convince myself that can't be right, it's too obvious, to only find out it was right all along. Those are very frustrating because it should not be that obvious. This one, I feel like there was just enough information given that you could figure it out, but no guarantee that you're going to figure it out early in the book. Okay, so after finishing Vera Wong, I almost said Vera Wang, that's the name of her tea house. The next book I was going to move on to was The Author's Guide for Murder. And this is by 3 different authors. And it's very fitting because the book is about 3 different women writers who get together and decide to write a book together. Or did they? They're sticking with this story that they met at a bar at a writer's conference, immediately became best friends, and decided they wanted to write a book together so they could go on tour together, and basically someone else would be paying for their girls' trip. But as you get to know the characters, they're not really best friends. It seems more like their editor is the one behind them writing this book. and they're going along with it, but they're not really fond of each other. And they ultimately end up paying to go to a writer's retreat at a castle in Scotland. There's a fictional author who is very successful, very famous, and he hosts a writing retreat for people wanting to write. I don't know if it's a specific genre of book, but he at least hosts a writer's retreat there. However, nobody ever sees him. He is very much a recluse. But I think it's a week-long retreat, and so they are staying in this castle to work on this book together for a week. But then a few days after they're there, I believe it's the author turns up dead. The book begins with a prologue that follows the police inspector, or whatever his title is, in Scotland. And then we switch back and forth between the three women's perspectives. So we have three authors who wrote this book, and then three authors in the book. So I don't know if each author wrote a different character's perspective or how it worked, but each chapter starts off with a short bit of an interview between the POV character and the police inspector, and then goes into their perspective beginning when they first arrived at the castle. And this book was listed as a mystery or thriller, and also under humor and satire on NetGalley, which is where I got approved for it. And I thought, a humorous satirical mystery book, I can get behind that. So I requested it. I don't know if there just wasn't enough information in the description or if I missed it, but I will say I've read, I think, 4 chapters so far, plus the prologue, and I think I'm going to call it on this one, because a lot of the story is hinged around sexual content. Not characters actually having sex, but the 3 writers are looking into the mystery of a man named Edward, who died mysteriously. Nobody knows how he died, well, they know how he died. Nobody knows who killed him. The murder was left unsolved. And this is from, I think, a couple hundred years ago, 200-300 years ago. But he is a man nicknamed Naughty Ned, because apparently he had a lot of sex parties, orgies, all that kind of stuff. Lots of different things in his life that were very sexually related that people didn't necessarily agree with. He was married, but he had a lot of mistresses, all that kind of stuff. And so they're wanting to research his death and write a book potentially about who they think may have killed him. And then the author who was found is, I don't know if he's necessarily dressed in it or it's just laid on top of him, but it's like a dominatrix outfit. And one of the 3 authors writes very sexually charged books. It sounds like she writes like supernatural steamy romance or supernatural erotica, something like that. And the supernatural part I'm really not interested in either, but there's just been enough things in this book so far that is just very sexually charged in talking about the lives of different characters. The character who writes the steamy books, she's like ridiculously flirts/throws herself at every guy that they've met so far. And it's just really to the point of, I don't feel like this is a book that I want to read. It just has enough content in there that I don't think I want to read a book that is chock full of that. I'm sure there will be plenty of other people who will enjoy this book, but it is not a book for me. So that meant the next book I was going to pick up was The Mysterious Mr. Quin by Agatha Christie, which is a collection of short stories following Harley Quinn, who I really don't remember much about. Like I said, I read one short story about him, and I don't remember much about it because it kind of gave the feel of, you probably already know this person by now, which I unfortunately did not. At this point, I have read 2 of the short stories. And I will say, 1, Harley Quinn plays a very small role in both. He doesn't show up until near the end. 2, the mysteries themselves are kind of interesting. Both involve solving a mystery where someone dies. So in the first story, there was a man who killed himself 10 years prior, and when Harley Quinn shows up at the house where some people are discussing this, he kind of questions, are you sure it was suicide? And has them recount the story to him to try to figure out, is that what actually happened? And in the second story, we have two people who are killed late in the book, and he shows up to meet with somebody else, and while he's there, again, starts asking questions to go, is what you think happened what actually happened? So the mysteries themselves are interesting, but Harley Quinn plays a very small role in them. There is one other character who has been in both stories, and I don't know if he's going to show up in every Harley Quinn story or not, but he's actually there for the entirety of the story, whereas Harley Quinn plays a very small role. So I'm almost curious why they're considered Harley Quinn stories and not Mr. Oh gosh, I have to look up how to say his name. Apparently, according to Google anyway, it's pronounced Satterthwaite. Mr. Satterthwaite shows up in both of the stories, and I just saw the very beginning of the third story, and Mr. Satterthwaite are the first two words in the story, so he does show up in the third one as well. The only reason I can think the stories are named after Harley Quinn and not Mr. Satterthwaite is because Harley Quinn is the one sort of figuring out the mystery. He's definitely the one leading the discussion on it and getting people to really talk about it and figure things out and relying on the facts of the case and not their feelings about it. So far, both the stories have been good, although I will be honest, I'm not enjoying these quite as much as I was enjoying Parker Pine, but I am still enjoying them enough. I will continue reading them. I'm really curious at this point if Mr. Satterthwaite is going to be a recurring character in all of these stories. So that is where I'm at this point. If I get done with this one in time, I will probably pick up the other NetGalley book that's also a mystery, but I want to make sure that I finish The Mysterious Mr. Quin first. So that's going to be my priority, and then we'll kind of go from there. So that's all I have for you for right now, which is probably not a bad thing because I've been talking for quite a while. So I will talk with you as I get further into The Mysterious Mr. Quin. Alright, so I did finish The Mysterious Mr. Quin by Agatha Christie, and I will say I did really enjoy this short story collection. As I said in my last update, I was a little bit confused because Harley Quinn doesn't show up until usually toward the end of the stories. And the stories are told from the perspective of a man named Mr. Satterthwaite. So I was kind of questioning, why are they called the Harley Quinn short stories and not Mr. Satterthwaite stories? In the end, I feel like they should be like the Satterthwaite and Quin stories or something like that. I feel like Mr. Satterthwaite's name should be in there somewhere. But I do understand why Harley Quinn's name is the one in the name of the collection and not Mr. Satterthwaite. Because if you say they're the Mr. Satterthwaite stories and then this other random guy named Harley Quinn keeps showing up, you would probably wonder, why is he not mentioned in the name of the series? Why do we have this random person? So I more so feel like both of their names should have been in the name of this collection and not just one of them. But ultimately, who is Harley Quinn? What is Harley Quinn? Is he a ghost? Is he an angel? Is he just an odd person? We really don't find out. The last story in this collection is called Harlequin's Lane, and I feel like that's the closest we get to any kind of idea about who or what Mr. Harley Quinn is. And even then, we do not get much of an answer. But I feel like we start to get a hint about who or what he is. And unfortunately at this point, I don't think I'm going to remember what all of them were about. I know in my Weekend Reading Challenge vlog, I went over all of the short stories I read by Nathaniel Hawthorne, or at least the ones that I read in that vlog. But with this one, with them all being mysteries, there's some I remember really well, there's some that I don't remember quite so well. So mostly I'm just going to name off the ones that I enjoyed the most. Alright, so some of the stories that I liked the most were The Sign in the Sky, and in this one we have a woman who is having an affair, and she contacts the man that she was having an affair with, tells him to come by her house, and then at some point after he leaves, she is found dead. And this happened, my understanding is this happened at least a few days, if not a few weeks or months, before Mr. Satterthwaite happens upon it. But he starts investigating to find out what actually happened, who was guilty of the murder, because somebody was arrested for the crime, but he's really starting to think that that person didn't do it. Then the next one is called The Man from the Sea, and I feel like I can't really talk about this one without giving away the ultimate answer to the story. But basically, we'll start with the early part of it. There's a man that Mr. Satterthwaite talks to who is basically contemplating suicide, and he tells Mr. Satterthwaite a bit of his life story, and yeah, we'll just leave it at that because I'm not sure how much more I can say without giving you enough information to figure out the rest of the story without actually reading it. So we'll leave it at that. Then one of the other ones I really liked was The Voice in the Dark, which is about a lady who contacts Mr. Satterthwaite because her daughter is talking about hearing voices at night. And her daughter is very concerned about this voice, but then she also ends up feeling like the brush of somebody going by her in the middle of the night and different things. And so he comes in to investigate, what is this voice? Why is she hearing it? And what's going on? So those were probably my 3 favorites from the collection. There were others that I really enjoyed, but I would say those were probably my favorites. And then I did also end up reading The Love Detectives, which is the last of the Harlequin short stories, and the only one that I hadn't read. Actually, it's technically the second to last story, but it was the only one that I hadn't read yet. And this one also was very much a favorite. So in this story, we have Mr. Satterthwaite visiting with a colonel who is also now like a commissioner, or I don't remember his exact title, but he's involved somehow in like the city government or city or county government. And he gets called up because a man is found dead in his house. So he shows up to talk to the police, figure out what's going on. And he and Mr. Satterthwaite and also Harlequin ultimately work together to figure out who killed this man. And I really enjoyed this one, especially the final reveal at the end. I did also go back and reread the Harlequin Tea Set. I read this one years ago. It's part of a short story collection of the same title. But I was very confused because it said it was a Harlequin mystery. Then Harlequin was barely in it. We followed Mr. Satterthwaite and I had no idea who he was. And then there are just some strange things at the end of the story that if you don't already know what Harlequin is like, you just end up feeling very confused about the end of that story. So, yeah, I ultimately went back to reread it, figuring I might have an appreciation for it now that I didn't then, and I absolutely did. I did really enjoy this one. I don't know that I can say it's one of my top all-time favorites out of the Harlequin stories, but I did really enjoy the story, and I enjoyed it so much more the second time around than I did the first. Alright, so I think that is all I have for you guys for today. So I did finish Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. I ultimately, unfortunately, DNF'd the author's guide to murder. And I did finish The Mysterious Mr. Quin and The Love Detectives, and technically reread the Harlequin Tea Set, all of which I really enjoyed. There was another book I was hoping to get to, but I wasn't able to work it in, unfortunately, so I will have to try to get to that at another point. Other than that, I think that's all I have for you guys for this vlog. If you read any of the stories that I talked about today, let me know what you thought about them. If you've read any good mysteries lately, especially a little more along the cozy or classic whodunit mysteries, I tend to really enjoy those the most. Let me know about them down in the comments below. And other than that, I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I'll see you later.